What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And yes, the All-Star starters were announced today, and we are going to break them down, and we had to bring in our favorite guest of the podcast, Jimmy Watkins, to join me and Chris to break down everybody that was on the All-Star roster for the starters for the Eastern and Western Conference. And Chris, for the sixth time in his career, he has made the All-Star game, and third time as a starter. Donovan Mitchell is the lone starter for the Cleveland Cavaliers that is already punched his ticket to San Francisco. This should not have been a surprise to anyone. But Chris, we're going to get into some of the statistics based on voting a little bit later. Donovan Mitchell, All-Star. Give me your thoughts.
Ethan, he was one of the four locks for the Eastern Conference. It was him, it was Karl Anthony Towns, it was Giannis, it was Jason Tatum. That was easy for everybody, myself included. The real question came to who are you going to put in the backcourt with him? Darius Garland, Cade Cunningham, Trae Young, Jalen Brunson. But the Donovan thing was not a surprise. He's the best player on the league's best team, tied for the best record in the NBA with Oklahoma City. He has taken a step forward in terms of leadership. His efficiency is better this year. It was an easy call going with Donovan. He was certainly one of the two guards on my personal ballot as well. And I thought it was interesting that he finished number one among all guards in the player vote, and he finished number one among all guards in the media vote. The only place that he finished second was in the fan vote, because LaMelo Ball has Gen X and he's got TikTok on his side.
Jimmy, I know there were a lot of questions as to who the second All-Star starter for the guards in the Eastern Conference was going to be. Obviously, Chris mentioned LaMelo Ball was number one in fan voting, but he was just third in player voting, and he was seventh in the media rank and was jumped for the second spot by Jalen Brunson, who was second in player voting, third in fan voting, and second in media voting. Jimmy, what did you think about this? And were you expecting Jalen Brunson to be the name that you saw on that list?
Yes, but because he's the New York representative, right? That's a market pick. That's a fan-based pick. What surprises me more is LaMelo Ball being on third place with the player voting, a little bit. I get there's this notion where like LaMelo Ball does things that a lot of players can't do, right? Some of the passes he makes, some of the handles that he flashes, the deep threes that he can hit. I think players respect. Like players don't look at your basketball reference page as much. They just watch you and they say, "Oh man, like there's a lot of LaMelo Ball does a lot of things. There are a lot of highlights of LaMelo Ball where there's small handful of guys that can pull that off." I think players respect what they can't do. So there's that element of it, and I also think there's an element of it where I just don't think we are watching a lot of basketball these days. I think a lot of players, like the fans in some cases, particularly as the league gets younger, are watching basketball via Twitter sometimes. Not everyone's a League Pass junkie. A lot of them see LaMelo Ball highlights and think that's the real thing. And I saw some graphic of LaMelo Ball, not to make this LaMelo Ball hate corner, but I saw a graphic of LaMelo Ball. I think it was posted by like the NBA. It's like, does LaMelo Ball get an All-Star snub? And in the graphic, it shows, 29 points a game, however many assists, however many rebounds. And that it shows in the graphic that he ranks 113th in the league in field goal percentage. Like, well, there you go. It's right there. You didn't have to look far. But no, the Jalen Brunson thing is earned because of, again, the jersey that he wears on the front. I also just think the Knicks asked that guy to do a lot, and the spacing situation has improved dramatically for them. But that guy, I'm so impressed by how much burden he carries, given how small he is. So I think Darius is having a better season than Jalen Brunson. That he has a better basketball reference page than Jalen Brunson. But Darius doesn't carry the same minutes minutes burden that Jalen Brunson carries on a night in, night out basis. And he's not like the system is different. He's not pounding the ball into the ground and throwing his body into guys as much as Jalen Brunson is.
I'll say this, guys. Nobody should feel bad about voting for Jalen Brunson. I almost did because he has had a hell of a year. And if you look at all of the different metrics that are supposed to measure value and impact, Jalen Brunson is near the top of the NBA. There are many of them where he has higher metrics than Darius Garland. There are. But at the end of the day, like I sided with Darius and I gave him my vote because Darius and Jalen Brunson are very, very close in so many of those metrics that I brought up. Like if you want to get really nerdy, it's like win shares, offensive win shares, value over replacement player, player efficiency rating, estimated plus minus on dunks and threes. Like all of those different things, some of them give the edge to Brunson. They do. But I think many of those are close enough where then I also looked at how the Cavs perform with Darius on the court and with him off the floor. And I also gave Darius a nod because the Cavs have the best record in the Eastern Conference, and he is at the center of that. Yes, Donovan Mitchell is also at the center of that. But Darius is an offensive engine. He is the best player in the NBA in clutch situations, in terms of plus minus, in terms of scoring overall in clutch situations. He's in the top 10. So the impact metrics are there. The value metrics are there. He's winning. And one of the things that helped me when it came to, backing up my decision to go with Darius is just how the Cavs perform with Darius on the court versus when he's off the floor. When he's on the floor, the Cavs have an offensive rating of 125.2. That would be historically great. Nobody has ever had an offensive rating as a team better than that. When Darius is off the floor, and by the way, like a lot of these minutes when Darius is off the floor, Donovan's on the floor. But when Darius is off the floor, the Cavs' offensive rating drops to 111. That's about 14 points per 100 possessions of a difference on the offensive end of the floor. It's not like that for Jalen Brunson. It's like that with Trae Young, but Trae didn't have the efficiency numbers that Darius did. So I looked at everything, and I felt really good at the end of the day about voting for Darius Garland as a starter. I think he deserves it. I think he's earned it. He's not going to be a starter because it's going to be Jalen Brunson. But nobody should feel bad about the Brunson pick because those two guys were very, very close. And I went up until 5:35 p.m. on Monday. Ballots were due at 6 p.m. I went up until 5:35 p.m. on Monday, talking to players around the league, talking to coaches around the league, talking to executives around the league, trying to get their opinion on the Jalen Brunson versus Darius Garland thing. I did my own research too, but I wanted to hear from as many smart people around the NBA as I possibly could to try and make the most informed decision that I possibly could. And at the end of the day, I went with Darius as a starter. It's not going to happen that way, but I think he's an essential lock to be a reserve at this point because I think enough people recognize the kind of impact that he has had for the Cavs, the kind of season that he has had for the Cavs. He has been one of the best guards in the entire NBA, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the entire NBA. He has been one of the most impactful players, no matter the position, in the NBA.
Here's
So
a spin for you, real quick. I don't want to get too far down this road. What if Darius over Donovan? Because, and I understand that Donovan is the leader of this team. We need to take all the intangibles into account when we're talking about him. He absolutely deserves to be an all-star. But if you look at the Vorps and Schnorps, as Zach Lowe likes to call them, like Darius outshines Donovan in a lot of those categories. His efficiency numbers are better than Donovan's. His assist numbers are better than Donovan's. Chris, as you just said, the on-off numbers are pretty impressive. I think you could make, and this is, by the way, this is not an anti-Donovan case whatsoever. I'm just making like this is how strong the Darius case is. We're like, okay, if we're just gonna allow the idea like fan vote counts for so much in the starters conversation, and we know that when you're going against Jalen Brunson in an All-Star conversation, you're going against the front of the jersey as much as you're going against the back of the jersey. I think you could make a case. I'm not saying I would put him there, but I think you could make a case for Darius over Donovan too. Just throwing it out there.
I argued against myself when I was making my own ballot because you had to, right? You had to come up with different things that some people could say in response to whatever it is that you wanted to vote for. And the thing that I ran into, Jimmy and Ethan, and I think it's the same conversation when it comes to Donovan Darius. It's the same conversation that I had when it came to LaMelo Ball Darius, Trae Young Darius, Jalen Brunson Darius. And this is no knock on Darius specifically. It's just the role that he's in. He doesn't have the same level of responsibility because he shares a backcourt with Donovan Mitchell that these other guys do. He's not guarded by the same guys that these other guys are guarded by. He's not at the top of the scouting report the way that these other guys are. The benefit that Darius has is that he plays alongside Donovan. And one of the reasons why you give an edge to somebody like Donovan is because you know he's the one who has to deal with Dylan Brooks. You know he's the one that has to deal with Lou Dort. You know he's the one who commands most of the defensive attention. You know he's the one that defenses are trying to scout against the best that they possibly can to make things as difficult on him as possible. And there's just a different level of pressure with that. There's a different level of responsibility with that. And I don't know how you quantify that, to be perfectly honest with you. That's part of the reason why I almost went with Brunson. I almost did. Because I said to myself, like, Darius has it easier from an offensive standpoint than Jalen Brunson does. And, like, how do you weigh that? How do you quantify that? I didn't know the answer to that. And the other thing is, Brunson and Darius are both terrible defenders, and Trae Young's a terrible defender. I don't care what Kenny Atkinson has said about Darius and the improvements he has made defensively. Like, there are absolutely no numbers in this universe that support that. There are none. In terms of defensive estimated plus minus, he's in the negative. In terms of the Cavs' defensive rating with him on the court versus off the court, they're significantly better when he's off the floor. So there just aren't numbers. Like, he's trying harder. He's stronger. He gets deflections and he gets steals and stuff like that. But the impact numbers for him as a defender, no, they're not there. Just like they aren't there for Jalen Brunson, just like they aren't there for LaMelo Ball, just like they aren't there for Trae Young. So that's essentially a wash when you talk about them as defenders. And on top of that, Donovan's a better defender than all those guys. So Donovan has the defensive edge over Darius, and I also think he has the intangible responsibility, expectation, pressure, all that stuff that comes with being the alpha.
So I want to mix in some fun along with the great conversation and debate that's happening here. And I'm doing that by bringing it back to what Jimmy had mentioned earlier and what Chris has referenced on every occasion that LaMelo Ball's name has been brought up and his TikTok fandom. But the post that Jimmy was mentioning when it comes to LaMelo Ball in his snub from an all-star starter was posted by House of Highlights. And I kept telling Chris this a couple weeks ago that it's overtime, House of Highlights, TikTok, whatever you want to call it. Like, those are the main.
On these accounts, LaMelo Ball is a 5-time MVP and NBA champion.
No,
it's
for
just
real.
A different universe over there.
It's a different time space. It's different warp for sure. But the top 3 comments on this post from the was LaMelo Ball snubbed, and it starts with LaMelo got robbed button. 16.7 thousand people in the last 3 hours have already liked that. Hold on, let me refresh to make sure. Yep, it's 16.7 thousand. The next being, how does this logically make sense? What's the point of fan vote then? Basically, I think this person is saying, like, how is he getting jumped if he's number one in fan voting? This got 6,587 likes on Instagram. And then, maybe my favorite comment on this one, I'm pissed. I'm about to get in my car and bend that corner straight to the Adam Silver house. Whoa. That got 6,832 likes on Instagram on House of Highlights, just in the comments section.
That was a good
So,
comment.
yeah, it's
Whoever
a
did
great
that one,
comment.
kudos. That was well done.
You know what's crazy is LiAngelo Ball will have a greater impact on this NBA season than LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball is going to score 28 a night on the emptiest 30 win team that you've ever seen. They'll be playing Tweaker for at least another season in the arenas.
The odds that it's going to be in NBA 2K for next year are very high, very high. But Chris, like, I think we need, or the fans need, an explanation as to how that can happen. How a guy that was number one in the fan voting and had been for the entirety for all of the voting returns, and then somehow he drops down to third, being bounced out of being an all-star starter. How does that even work? Why is that an option?
Hashtag blame the media. No, I mean, like, the way that it's set up is that fan vote accounts for 50%, media is 25%, and player is 25%. And then you get what is called a weighted score based on all of those votes from all those different people. And LaMelo Ball finished first in fan voting, and that's great. That boosted his chances of being a starter, but he finished seventh among the media, and he finished seventh or third from the players. So when you're talking about seventh from the media and they count for 25%, and third from the players and they count from 25%, and Jalen Brunson finished close enough in the fan voting because he was third in fan voting, and he finished significantly higher in both media and player rank. He had a higher weighted score than LaMelo. And it's not like LaMelo didn't have a chance. He absolutely had a chance. He finished third among guards, in part because, players respect him. Players thought he was worthy. They gave him enough votes for him to finish third in that ranking, and because fans love him. So it was close in terms of weighted score, which is ultimately what ends up determining this. Jalen Brunson's weighted score was 2.5. LaMelo Ball's weighted score was 3. So, I mean, the bottom line is, if LaMelo Ball would have finished higher in the media rank, then he would be a starter. He would be the second starter. But he didn't, so his weighted score just wasn't as high as Jalen Brunson, who finished, high in every single category rather than being boosted by one specifically.
Translation: the people who actually watch basketball watched too much basketball. I'm sorry. I mean, look, I like watching LaMelo Ball on the right night. I think he's a good basketball player, capable of being a winning basketball player. But he's not right now. And I know that there will be a crusade. Like, when people hear the word the media, or the concept, the media, they think a lot of times, like, I don't know, Kendrick Perkins, Stephen A. Smith, guys who also sometimes, those guys are, and by the way, there's a reason for this. Sometimes they come in with these big picture takes on situations that they're not quite so familiar with because they are spread very thin. As commentators, they are asked to do a lot of work, and they're not always in front of a television watching League Pass, watching, Cavs Hawks on a Wednesday night. But there are, for every one Kendrick Perkins and Stephen A. Smith who would have a hard time playing who he played for on TNT, there are 5 Chris Fedors who are in the mud watching or at every game of the teams they cover and keeping a detailed account of the teams they play against. And I promise you, the system that we have is better than if we gave fan 100% of the vote. Because I'm trying to think, we had a couple of cases in the last decade where, was it Boban who used to get a crazy amount of fan votes? Because
Derrick Rose did too.
Yeah, Derrick Rose used to get a crazy amount of fan votes. But like, people who are from other countries, It's great to have national pride, but like some of these guys don't deserve to be all-stars. And was it Andrew Wiggins got in on a weird fan vote
Yeah.
situation a couple of years ago? I'm not saying Andrew Wiggins didn't have a great year that year. It's the best year of his career. Not sure he should have been an all-star starter. It's just like if we're gonna make this a point of status for players, we have to give the vote to people who take it seriously. If you ask me, I think 50% is a little steep for the fan vote to count for this sort of thing because like all-star starter should be a differentiator from being a general all-star. But there's this rub where like it's very possible that Darius Garland, if you think he should be an all-star starter, you could just point and say Jalen Brunson plays for the Knicks. That's why he got it. And Chris and I both said Jalen Brunson, we're the all-star starter. But shouldn't this, if we're gonna make it mean something, shouldn't we take the process seriously?
I think it's funny. It's a good point. It's a funny point as well that you make, Jimmy, about how like NBA beat reporters who are traveling and can get caught like literally writing their stories at the end of nights and all these different things. And I know more than one occasion where I've seen Chris literally on the podcast with me while watching a separate game that has nothing to do with the Cavs. And
You're
I'm
like
like,
right now.
yeah, literally. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but it's just like, and the other portion of that is the fact that majority of the stats that Chris listed off that he went through to decipher between the players, most regular casual fans don't know even exist. So that's the difference of watching highlights, which are curated for fans to like that certain player, rather than watching the game and understanding like the percentages of different things. And go further into the nerdy conversation with Chris if you would like. But I'm gonna go into the second portion of this conversation,
Sorry,
which is where
one more thing. I'm not trying to even get nerdy. Watch LaMelo Ball play 35 minutes of basketball. That's all I'm asking. Watch him and count how many times you say, wow, I've never seen anyone do that before. And then count how many times you said that because a good thing happened. And then count how many times you said it because a bad thing happened. This dude, some of the three-pointers that he attempts, and I get it. We are an advanced basketball society. We are all about encouraging bold three-point attempts. If you're particularly a player like LaMelo Ball, who runs a lot of pick and rolls, and you want guys to have to go over you on screens, you want to be someone who needs to be accounted for at every area of the court. But it just seems like he's got no sense of time and place. So this is a really important possession. I don't have it going right now. 35-footer bricks off the side of the backboard. Like, come on, dude. The turnovers that he has sometimes, mind-numbing. As audacious as his assist can be in highlights, some of them are just as ugly in the lowlights, and we don't get 7-minute cut-ups of those on YouTube. The defense, the effort, like this stuff. Just watch an entire game, please.
Yeah, I don't think he should have been a starter. When I was narrowing my list down amongst guards, it was pretty easy to cut him from the group. It was Cade Cunningham, it was Darius Garland, it was Jalen Brunson, it was Trae Young. Like, that's how I had it narrowed down. And then I really dug into those four side by side as much as possible. In saying that, in defense of LaMelo, he is an offensive wizard. Okay, we can acknowledge that. The offensive metrics love him, and rightfully so, because like he is the engine of the Charlotte Hornets. Now you can sit there and you can say like, what kind of engine or what kind of car is that? And he's the engine of it. So how far are they going to go? But like, we can't just assume. We do this thing sometimes where we just assume that like anybody can play on a bad team and put up numbers or these kinds of numbers. And I'm just not going to assume that everybody in the LaMelo Ball role would go out there and score 29 a night, right? I'm just not going to assume that because I don't think you can, because there's a special gift that he has as an offensive player. And you can see that when he plays. In terms of box plus minus, he's top 15 in the NBA. In terms of offensive box plus minus, he's top 5 in the NBA. In terms of estimated plus minus, he's in like the 96th percentile. So like there is a case for him as an offensive player because of the things that he has accomplished this year for Charlotte. But the two things that work against him is that he plays for Charlotte and they have 11 wins. And at some point, winning has to matter, and showing that you can be a part of winning, showing that your game can translate to winning basketball and it can impact winning basketball. That has to matter. And it's just a deep crop. That's the thing. You get two. You get two guard votes at the starter spot. Two. So, like, if you want to put him as a starter, that means you have to subtract somebody from that group. And for myself, I could not subtract Darius in favor of LaMelo. I could not subtract Jalen Brunson in favor of LaMelo. Same thing with Cade Cunningham, and same thing with Trae Young. That's just what we're trying to decide. It's going to be difficult for these NBA coaches to figure out the reserves, because they've got 7 spots in the East and they've got 7 spots in the West. And adding somebody means excluding somebody who is probably worthy. You know what I'm saying? But that's the challenge. That's why it's an all-star game. We're talking about the best of the best and trying to identify the best of the best. And I think LaMelo has an all-star case. I don't think he has a starter case. And to me, that's the difference.
So before we get into that conversation, just an anecdote for the next conversation and to end this one. I mean, LaMelo Ball, to Jimmy's point, like, it's only going to get worse watching him for the remainder of the season, because Brandon Miller is now out for the rest of the year with a wrist surgery. So now, like, all of the shots that Brandon Miller were taking, shift those over to LaMelo Ball as well. So if you want to see a guy take 30 shots in a game, congratulations, Charlotte Hornet fans. You probably got it. But
don't worry, LaMelo Ball is only going to play like 20 more games anyways before he gets hurt again. I'm really not trying to be... I like the idea of LaMelo Ball. I think he can be fun to watch on the right night, and we might never know it, but on a good team, I think there could be a place for him if you refine some of the rough parts in his game. But it's just like, the people who are voting for him, number one, as the starter, you're just not watching basketball. I'm sorry, you're not.
So the other thing for the caveats of the reserves before we get into this conversation is apparently Jalen Johnson just recently went back to the locker room because of a left shoulder injury. And he apparently just ran off the court and ran straight to the locker room. So that's never a good sign. And he is also not, it's said that he will not return to the game this evening. So I don't want to throw any bad mojo or juju out there towards that, but like, that doesn't bode well for a guy that's in the conversation for a reserve spot, especially like, what is it, 7 days from the announcement, because they announced it on the 30th. Yeah, from the reserves. So yeah, that's a different conversation that we're going to have. But now let's look at where the Cavs finished off in the voting for starters, and then talk about the conversation about who is most likely to end up being a reserve. Obviously, we know Donovan Mitchell finished first in the player ranking, second in fan voting, and first in media ranking. So his weighted score was 1.5 that had him as the top spot in the Eastern Conference guards starting lineup. And then you go down to Darius Garland. He finished 5th in player ranking, 8th in fan ranking. Darius Garland, 3rd in media ranking. So his weighted score was 6. So he was left off of the ultimate list for the starters. But that bodes well for him when it comes to the reserve conversation. Then you have Evan Mobley, who finished 4th in player ranking, 6th in fan ranking, and 4th in media ranking, having a weighted score of 5. So he was literally just outside the 3. He was 5th on that list. Paolo Banchero, who hasn't played 25 games yet, was in that 4th spot. Then you look down to Jared Allen, who finished 8th in player ranking, 9th in fan ranking, and 5th in media ranking, finishing with a weighted score of 7.75. So, Chris, I think we had this conversation a lot. It's going to be extremely hard for the Cavs to get all 4 of their core 4 members into the All-Star game, even as reserves having 3 slots. But it seems more likely that the Cavs could have the possibility of adding 2 more to their already having 1, so 3 total. Darius Garland and Evan Mobley being those votes. What do you think about where they sit and how their chances fare with the coaches around the NBA of gaining a reserve spot for San Francisco?
Well, just to set it up, the 7 reserve spots are broken down like this: 2 guards, 3 front court, and 2 wild cards, regardless of position. So let's go through it. I mean, that's the only way that you can do it. If you're talking about the reserve guards, now you've got the same kinds of conversations that you were having when discussing Darius Garland as a potential all-star starter. Darius versus LaMelo, Darius versus Trey, Darius versus Cade, Darius versus Dame, Darius versus Tyler Hero. I don't know how coaches are going to view it. It feels like in the past, coaches reward winning. And I think there's a recognition of the kind of year that Darius has had, the kind of strides that he has made as a player, and the impact that he's had on the Cavs having the best record in the Eastern Conference. Cade's been great. It's going to be hard to leave Cade off. Trae Young is not liked by coaches. So that's a wild card in this whole conversation. Trae is looked at around the NBA. He has a specific reputation around the NBA, and coaches have shown in the past that they are not big fans. So that's going to be interesting to see how all of that shakes out. But I think Darius has a very, very strong case. It's just, again, it's a deep guard pool, and you're picking 2 of those, at most 4 of those. Right? And maybe you do pick 4 of them because there just aren't as many worthy front court players to give one of those wild card spots to. So I could see a situation, guys, where the coaches do pick 4 guards, and they pick Darius, they pick Cade, they pick Trey, and they pick LaMelo. I could see a situation where that happens. And it would be hard to argue against that. Because like I said, when it comes to the front court, like the pathway to getting in as a front court Eastern Conference player is a little bit easier because what do you do with Paolo? Paolo just came back from a significant injury. Paolo finished high. He finished 4th among front court players because he was 5th among players, 4th among fans, and 5th in the media. But are coaches going to hold it against him that he's missed such a large chunk of the season? I guess we'll have to see. And then Franz Wagner, the same thing. Jaylen Brown is a lock. Jaylen Brown is getting one of those front court spots. So now you got 2 more. Do you give Paolo one of them? What do you do about Pascal Siakam? I think at this point, the way that everything is trending and the depth of guard, we can just stop the conversation about Jared Allen. It is not happening. He's going to be all-star adjacent. He's going to be honorable mention, but he just doesn't have all-star level production. He does not.
So before I let Jimmy go, because I'm going to, and I know, Jimmy, you have your thoughts on this whole conversation, but the Orlando Magic, albeit without a lot of their key guys, even though they did get Franz Wagner back tonight against the Portland Trailblazers, they lost 101-79. Paolo Banchero was 1 of 14 from the field with 8 points. Franz Wagner in 24 minutes, 9 of 19 for 20 points. So, obviously, again.
Okay, we could do that, though. We could do that throughout the course of the season where we pull up a bad box score for Donovan Mitchell, or we pull up a bad box score
that's exactly
for Darius
where I was
Garland,
going
or
next.
we pull up a bad box score for Jared Allen, or a bad week for Jared Allen.
That's exactly what I was going to say next. That's exactly what I was going to say next, Chris, is the fact that Paolo has played now 12 games in the NBA this season. That's his 12th game.
He's played 12 games. You're not an all-star. Sorry. 12 games. That's the whole thing. Sorry, you got to play the game. You got to play. Can you play half of the games? My goodness. 12 games. I played 12 games in a weekend at the Y. Come on. That's insane.
All right, so then who are your 3 reserves for the front court?
Well, I mean, it would be Mobley. I'm just saying. I think that taking Paolo away opens the door for the Jared Allen conversation. I'm not gonna. I understand Jared Allen is not spiritually. Jared Allen is not an all-star. I think if we were ever gonna make him an all-star again, it would be in the season where the Cavs are running away with the league, and he's part of one of the best defenses in the NBA. And sure, the box scores numbers aren't there every night right now, but we know he's capable of that. We know he's capable of we do a lot of with the All Star with some of the again spiritual All Stars. These guys who have a 25+% usage rate, 30% usage rate. We'll do this thing a lot of times where it's like, well, their numbers are a little down this year, but we know they're capable of getting 25, so we put them in there. Jared Allen, I think, has a little bit of that to him too. Or what is it, 14 and 11 right now? You know that at times last year he's 20 and 10, whatever. I'm not making the Jared Allen case right now, but Paolo Banchero, I just kept rubbing my eyes and looking at these voting results. I'm like, what? He played 12 games. The conversation's over. So put Evan Mobley in, put Jaylen Brown in, put Franz Wagner in. Franz Wagner carried the Magic for a lot of this season while Paolo was hurt. So reward him. Paolo has already been an all-star. He will be an all-star several more times in his career. We don't have to bend the rules to this extent for him. We have rules for all NBA where if you don't play essentially 2/3 of the season, you don't get to be considered for all NBA. And I know that comes with its landmines. It's hard to play 2/3 of the season if you miss basically a month, which can happen at any time. Dumb luck. You miss out on something that can impact your ability to provide for your family. I don't think there's a perfect solution to that. But with the All-Star game, I don't know what the number is, but it's kind of a know it when you see it thing. And I know when I see 12 games, no, not you.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair to leave Paulo out, especially this year. I think it would be fair to leave Franz out. I think there's a case for Pascal Siakam. I think he's having arguably the best season of his career, and Indiana's a legitimate playoff team. I think there's a case for Jalen Johnson of Atlanta. He's averaging a double-double. He's been really, really important to the success of that team, success being a relative term, certainly. I just think he helps them in a lot of different ways, and he stuffs the stat sheet. And when he's on the floor and he's healthy, they're a very good team. They're a formidable team. He guards some of the toughest perimeter players in the NBA. So he's got the defense to back up the things that he does on the offensive end. I think there's a case for him. I think there's a case for Bam Adebayo too, for Miami. Again, I think it's more likely to me that both wild card spots are guards than one of those being a front court spot. So I think it is 3 front court guys. And I think it's Jaylen Brown lock. I think it's Evan Mobley close to a lock. And I think it's between Franz, Pascal Siakam, Bam, and Jalen Johnson. I don't think as much as Jarrett is impactful to the things that the Cavs do, I just don't think he has the numbers to match up with some of these other guys that you're talking about that just look more the part of an all-star.
Yep, I think it's a difficult conversation. If I had to go through the reserves for the Eastern Conference, I would be Darius Garland, Cade Cunningham, Jaylen Brown, Evan Mobley, Trae Young, and then I get 2 more. I get 2 wild. So then this was the conversation. Like, are we adding LaMelo in there for the fun?
No, we're not.
Yes.
Zach LaVine. Give me Zach LaVine
No.
over LaMelo. Yes. Yes.
Oh, no. Zach LaVine.
My goodness. What about Dame?
Sure.
Yeah. I wouldn't do Dame. I wouldn't put Dame.
Sure.
Would you take Jimmy, at this point, would you take any human being that has a pulse in the Eastern Conference that plays basketball over LaMelo Ball?
Look,
But don't get him
there's
wrong. Don't get him wrong. He doesn't hate the guy.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I like counting the games in the standings. My fault. My fault. I like watching the entire broadcast. He's a fun play. He's made for the All-Star game. He would be a great addition to the All-Star game.
Yeah.
I just think there are more deserving, we just have to team success. We're trying to win basketball games. Rewarding the guys. In theory, we're rewarding the guys who do the most to help their team win basketball games. And if you don't win any basketball games, like it's not just they've won 11 games, but like didn't they start like 6-8? They've won like one game a week, if that, for the last 3 months. It's sad. Like he's contributing to a tank right now. This time next year we're going to talk about Keontae George for the All-Star team because he's scoring 20 points a game on the Utah Jazz. I'm just picking names out of a hat at this point right now, obviously. But like Colin Sexton on the dark era Cavs. Like who cares? I don't care if you can score 23, 25, 29 points a game. I don't care. Win basketball games.
I think there are always levels to this conversation. And I think when you have the conversation of LaMelo as a starter and you're comparing him against some of those other guys, they're going to be deemed more worthy. But at some point, you reach the conversation peak where you say, all right, how much am I going to continue to hold it against him that Charlotte is trash, that organization is basically purposely tanking, they've been trash for a number of years. You know what I'm saying? Like, at some point, can't you evaluate the player independent of his teammates, independent of his situation? And I'm not talking about starter. I'm just talking about one of the wild card spots, like the 11th or 12th guy in this all-star conversation. Doesn't the conversation become a little bit different, especially when you're starting to compare him more to Tyrese Maxey instead of Jalen Brunson, right? Zach LaVine, who you brought up instead of Darius Garland, or whoever else has a pulse in the Eastern Conference that you want to bring up instead of, some of these other top tier all-star starter type candidates. Maybe, possibly, does the conversation change a little bit?
It changes, and you certainly have to consider him more. But like, the NBA will remember Zach LaVine's season. He might make it play in the play-in, or he might actually get traded to a contender at the deadline. LaMelo Ball is the tree falling in the woods. Like, no one cares. Again, except for apparently the people of TikTok. Nobody cares about what LaMelo Ball is doing right now. And to the point that the Hornets are tanking. Did they accidentally go 6-8? Did they accidentally go 6-8 the first 15 games of the season? Have they been intentionally tanking for half a decade? Like we got Mark Williams over there. We got Brandon Miller over there. Charles Lee brings some championship DNA from the Celtics. Like at some point, this is like it's not fair to a certain extent because I'm taking LaMelo's career and putting it into the season conversation now. But like this guy has been the best player on the worst team of the last 5 years. Like, there's two sides to this coin. I'm real quick. I'm so close to finishing. Two sides to this coin. Yes, you need to change the conversation when we're talking wins and losses for the All-Star game. When we're talking about numbers that are so impressive as LaMelo Ball and a player who can catch lightning in a bottle as many times as he can during a basketball game. At the same time, we do this thing with the All-Star game where we include your reputation. We put guys in because you know what? If it's a coin flip at the end of the day and you've made 10 All-Star games and this other guy has made 2, I'm going 10 All-Star game guy. If I can help it and this guy is responsible for 7 of 20 wins every single year, it's not just him and his teammates anymore. It's a him thing too.
So I'm looking at the records for the last 14 games in the NBA. Here are the teams that have won less than 5 games in that span. Philadelphia 76ers, Orlando Magic, Dallas Mavericks, Charlotte Hornets, Utah Jazz, Brooklyn Nets, Washington Wizards. Um, and Zach LaVine and the Bulls are just outside of that with 6 wins. They're 6-8 in their last 14 games. So I don't know. And then you got San Antonio Spurs and Toronto Raptors are 5-9 in the last 14 games. A lot of teams also have won just 6 games. Chicago, Golden State, Miami, Portland.
You say 6-8 in their 14 games? That's the pinnacle of LaMelo Ball's career. When the Hornets started 6-8 to start this season, that's as good as it gets for that guy. Zach LaVine's having a bad couple weeks. LaMelo Ball, that's it. That's going in his Hall of Fame case. That 6-8 stretch. Come on. I mean, look, like if Cam Thomas had played enough games to be in this conversation, like this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. He doesn't do it efficiently, and his team sucks.
Your comparison of Colin Sexton wasn't averaging 29.
His team sucks.
All right, Cam Thomas
really
not
sucks.
averaging 29 a game. It's a little bit different. It happened.
Jimmy, you out of pocket, bro.
You know what? I have a new theory. I think LaMelo Ball would have made the All-Star starters if they didn't ban TikTok for 12 hours over the weekend.
For 12 hours?
Internet,
I think that was the difference. It was a close vote.
In Philly.
It was a close vote. People stopped scrolling mindlessly through highlights for 12 hours. They had to find something else to do. They started watching actual games. Like, holy crap, Jalen Brunson. You guys seen this guy? Pretty good. You see him pivot? I've never seen anybody pivot like that.
Pivot and not directly go into a fadeaway jumper or fadeaway three-pointer from 30 feet.
At Brunson Pivots. Follow me on TikTok.
At LaMelo Hater. Follow him on TikTok. You got it. Oh, all right, fellas. So are we, Jimmy, are you sold on the take that Jared Allen can and still has a chance of being a reserve, even though you have guys like
the door is,
Pascal Siakam?
I would say the door is cracked because if we're having a conversation about a dude that's played 12 games, then the door can't possibly be all the way shut. But no, I get it. I understand. I think that spiritually he's not an all-star. I would love. I mean, this is me as a basketball observer. All you need to know. I like winning games. And if we were to reward the Cleveland Cavaliers for winning games at a historic pace, and we were to just overlook the fact that Jared Allen averages about 4 fewer points than your typical all-star, that would be great. And if we could acknowledge the fact that LaMelo Ball has worse efficiency than, like, I'm just going to pick a name out of a hat. It's probably going to be right. Worse efficiency than, like, Fred VanVleet, and his team wins once every blue moon. That's how often they win a game. Literally, like once every, I don't even know how often that is, like 29 days or something. Then we could keep LaMelo Ball out of the All-Star game. That would be nice.
We're already rewarding the Cavs, though. We are. Like, they're going to reward the Cavs. They're going to have 25% of the spots on the Eastern Conference All-Star roster. Think about that.
Right. But is
they're
that
going to have Darius Garland. They're going to have Donovan Mitchell. They're going to have Evan Mobley. There are 12 spots. They're going to have 3 of them. And the entire coaching staff is going to be – it's going to be the Cavs Invitational already in San Francisco. So that is a reward.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have to give Jared Allen a spot just because, you know, the Cavs are the best team in the Eastern Conference and he's part of their core 4. Look, he is so important to the things that they do. He is indispensable. But we're having an all-star conversation. We're not talking about importance in this organization and this organization only. There are other guys around the NBA that are just as important to their teams that have more responsibility than he does, that put up better numbers than he does, that have better overall metrics, the ones that I've already referenced, whether it's box plus minus, value over replacement player, estimated plus minus, offensive rating, defensive rating, whatever ones you want to pull out there. Like Jarrett has some that are very favorable to him. There's no doubt about it. But there's other guys that are in this same conversation that are also in that same range with a lot of those metrics, and their overall counting numbers are a little bit more appealing than what you get from Jared Allen on a nightly basis. You also have to look at the fact that he is the fourth member of the core four. He is the fourth piece of the best team in the NBA. So as much as like he's not having plays called for him and he's not getting all these touches and he's not getting all these shot attempts the same way that these other guys are, he's also not commanding the same kind of attention as these other guys are.
To be fair,
Defensively though, he's a tier above, I don't know, 85% of the other people we're talking about. And I would say that Darius, Donovan, and Evan Mobley, those guys are all-stars regardless of what team they play for. Put them anywhere. I think they're having all-star seasons. So if we're going to reward the Cavs, I would like to see a fourth guy on there. I know that's not going to happen. I'm okay. I can live with it. But I'm just saying that, like, the defense is half the sport. I know that the all-star game it's 0% of the all-star game, so who cares? And, again, spiritually, Jared Allen, not an all-star. And if we really, I actually had about half an hour penciled in before this podcast because I knew we were going to have this conversation. I was like, this is my time to get into Basketball Reference and make the case for Jared Allen. And then I burned my dinner, set the smoke alarm off, and had to deal with that for about the next 20, 25 minutes. So I'm just gonna rest my case and say that Jared Allen plays more defense than most people who are going to be in the All-Star game. We are not rewarding the Cavs with 3 All-Stars. 3 All-Stars have earned it. Rewarding them would be giving them one more. And yes, there are it's not about rewarding Jared Allen's importance to this organization, but certain organizations are more important than others. If you win more games, you are more important to the league. Jared Allen's team has won the most games, so the fourth best player on the Cavs is more important than the first best player on, I'll pick a name out of the hat, the Charlotte Hornets, perhaps. That's all. That's all.
You are not going to let that go.
I'll take
there are other people in this conversation than just
sure.
LaMelo Ball.
No, I know.
Right?
I know.
Are you taking Jared Allen over Bam Adebayo?
I'm trolling at that point. No, I'm not.
Are you taking Jared Allen over Bam Adebayo?
No, I'm not. No. At a certain point, it becomes a "Are you a better basketball player?" conversation, and he's not. He's not a better basketball player than Bam Adebayo.
Okay. All right. So here's 2 things. One, Paolo Banchero, the only reason, and I think we can all agree that we wouldn't have him as our reserve because of the minimum amount of games that he's played. But we're having this conversation because he was 4th on the list for starters. Like he was above Evan Mobley, right? And we're having this conversation about Jared Allen. So like it has to be in the conversation. So that's it for fans asking.
I would be more upset if Paolo Banchero made the All-Star team than if LaMelo Ball made the All-Star team. I'm serious. 12 games is ridiculous.
Okay, and the last point I wanted to make about the Cavs, because don't think I've made a Cavs take on this podcast, but I don't know if I agree with what you said, Jimmy, that if you throw Darius, Evan, and Donovan on a different team that they'd be all-stars. Donovan, probably, because he's a number 1 option, but Darius and Evan are being elevated by Donovan, and that's a portion of the reason why he's been an all-star starter and in the MVP candidate because he continues to uplift all these guys. I don't know if Evan Mobley has the jump that he does. He puts in the work, but is he getting fed the ball the same way or told to bring the ball up the floor by Donovan Mitchell because they split the minutes of him and Jared Allen? Is Darius Garland having the freedom to do what he wants? Unless he's on one of these teams like the Charlotte Hornets, are you on a finals contention team and saying, okay, Darius Garland, you're going to be our second best or number 1 option, depending on what he's doing in the season. And
Darius
also
Garland made an all-star team on a team like that before. So
right. No, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying he didn't play like this in that season.
I mean, I would argue this is the best season of his career, and if you put him on a team like that right now, his box score numbers would explode in a way that they aren't because the Cavs are smacking everyone, which lets everyone sit in the 4th quarter, and because they have so many different ways to attack you that they don't need Darius to have as carry as much burden as, say, a guy like Jalen Brunson or something like that. And I feel the same. Evan Mobley, like, even when he hadn't figured out his offense yet, all-world defensive player, and I think as much as we say that Donovan is elevating Evan right now, and I think that's true, he's empowering him. He gets him the ball in great spots. He gets 2 defenders drawn to him, which lets Evan play 4-on-3, which is an advantageous position to be in. I also think you could argue that being on this team the first couple years of Evan's career held back his development offensively a little bit. You drop Evan on a regular lottery team that isn't good the instant he gets there. I wonder why that happened. You just get the chance to work out and live through your mistakes, and you can just shoot 15 plus shots a game your rookie year, because let's be honest, the result of these games aren't that important. The important thing is that you, star young player, in this case Evan Mobley, gets the reps. So I think I will speak with even more conviction to that take. I think Evan Mobley and Darius Garland are all-star caliber players regardless of where they play this year. Unless
I think
they're
your
on the
point
Hornets, of course.
Oh my God. I think your point about Evan Mobley and his growth being stunted offensively because he was on the Cavs is a good one, because we've talked about how, and we had this conversation coming into the season, whether or not the Cavs would prioritize his offensive development or continue to try and bank wins. And it kind of worked hand in hand in the same kind of sequence. But Chris, what do you think about this conversation about whether or not Darius Garland, Evan Mobley would be all-stars on different teams with different roles, maybe on a same kind of team? Say you put them on the Milwaukee Bucks or the New York Knicks or the Orlando Magic. Would these guys have a similar kind of output that they're having this season with the all-star contention that they're in?
I don't know about in terms of production. I don't know about in terms of output, guys, but I will say that Darius Garland is an all-star caliber player and Evan Mobley is an all-star caliber player, and that transcends situation, that transcends system, that transcends the situation that he is in based on his teammates and based on the Cavs roster makeup and all that kind of stuff. So I just think, the only time, the couple of times in his career where Darius has just not played well, there have been circumstances and logical explanations for that. His first year in the NBA, the Cavs were bad. Darius was coming off 5 games in college, and he was just thrown into the fire in the NBA, and he was statistically the worst player in the NBA. But it was logical because of everything that he had dealt with over the course of that year, because of how he showed up to training camp, because the way that he couldn't work on his game in the offseason. And then last year, it's been well documented. He's even called it the hardest year, one of the hardest years of his entire life, both basketball-wise and just from a personal standpoint. So when you had somebody dealing with that, those 2 years pop up as the anomaly. Aside from that, he's got the pedigree. He was a top 5 pick for a reason. He's an elite pick and roll player. He's an elite outside shooter. He's got incredible passing ability. He's got an incredible wizard-like handle. He can get past defenders off the dribble. He can create space to get his shots off. He makes his teammates better. So I think that translates to Charlotte. I think that translates to Orlando. I think that translates to Miami. I think that translates to any place where you drop him in. And Evan Mobley is just a freak. He is a unicorn. He is somebody who, since the minute he came into the NBA, it's been about his impact more so than his production. And even when he didn't have, the eye-popping numbers, his ceiling was top 5 defensive player in the league, who also was averaging about 18, 10, and 3. And that was being the 3rd option offensively, some nights the 4th option offensively. So being able to put up that kind of production in that role, I thought it spoke volumes about Evan and the kind of player that he already was and the kind of player that he could become in the future. But whether he's putting up numbers or not, he's impacting the game on a possession-to-possession basis. You can do things defensively with him because of his switchability, because of his ability to play out on the perimeter just as comfortable as he is out there. He can be comfortable protecting the rim and playing as a weak side defender and all those different things. He can get rebounds and initiate in transition. He can play out of inverted pick and rolls. He can play out of the elbow in the post. He can attack mismatches. Like, that plays anywhere. That plays in any system. So again, he's got the pedigree. He's got the defensive reputation that's backed up by all the impact numbers as well. And no matter where Evan is in his career, whether it was in Cleveland, whether it was in Houston, whether it was in Oklahoma City, Detroit, he was going to be a guy that was looked at as a star, because there aren't many guys in the NBA with his combination of size, speed, athleticism, and skill set. So that's an all-star in any situation. That's the definition of an all-star. And I don't think Evan so much is entirely a product of Kenny Atkinson's system or the Cavs being, one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. Maybe you consider them the best team in the Eastern Conference. Certainly they have the best record in the Eastern Conference. Like, I don't think Evan's a product of that. I think part of the reason why they are that is because of Evan Mobley and the growth that he has made. And the same thing when it comes to Darius Garland. So it's kind of like this chicken or egg conversation, but I think they're both talented enough to go anywhere in the NBA and be all-star level players, because at the end of the day, they are all-star level players.
And that's exactly how I wanted to end this podcast. This great all-star conversation, the chicken or the egg conversation. And so that will wrap up this episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. And with OSU winning the national championship, obviously the parade comes soon, and then the Brown season also being over, I think you can expect to see Jimmy on the podcast just a little bit more. So if you want to talk to him before we get on the podcast about other things that he may have scorching hot takes on, sign up for Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial, or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.